On April 19th, 1995, explosions tore through the Federal Building in Oklahoma City, ripping through the consciousness of America. 168 people were killed and hundreds wounded. Since that day of horror, groundbreaking new information has come to light, so provocative, so explosive, that it threatens to shatter everything we thought we knew about the true face of terrorism.
Based on the damage pattern to the building, what the government says is impossible.
I haven't stopped asking questions because I know that we haven't been told the truth.
What that tells you is that there were other explosive devices in the building that actually brought the building down.
I know for a fact Timothy McVeigh was with another individual on the morning of April 19th, right before the bombing.
He made the comment, yeah, we knew this was going to happen.
That caused a lot of questions in people's minds about, well, what really happened here?
The enhanced photo shows a very distinct possibility of a man standing behind that truck.
A lot of patients, I think, were lost that could have been saved.
The people that did the things they did knew doggone well what they were doing.
Some of these columns were ripped up, shredded, tossed around.
God, I hate to think that they did it on purpose.
Well, we can prove clearly that the official story is a fraud, that the government was involved and is using it to demonize good Americans.
I'm standing at about the point where Timothy McVeigh supposedly parked the truck bomb, the fuel oil fertilizer bomb that destroyed the Murrah building. Since April 19th, 1995, masses of evidence have come out. People have seen the newscast from the first day where they reported multiple bombs. Experts like General Benton Parton, ex-head of Air Force Weapons Development, Ted Gunderson, FBI chief, have documented with the U.S. Geological Survey's own seismographs that there were multiple explosions, that the building was blown out, and that it was impossible for a Ryder truck filled with even premium-grade military explosives to cause that damage. Now, there was probably a Ryder truck used as a diversion, and again, that corresponds to the multiple seismograph explosions shown by the state and federal agencies. But the media has chosen not to report on this. Now, here's the key point. They told you about a big crater. Newsweek had to show you an illustration because they didn't have any video evidence. Well, here is the video evidence. A pile of rubble. The building was blown out. Now we're fixing to show you some newscast with more conflicting evidence. There you had the pile of rubble, not a crater.
We want to update our audience that the Justice Department is reporting that a second explosive device has been found in the AP Murrah building in downtown Oklahoma City. Mike, you're still with us, aren't you?
Yes, I am, and I might tell you in addition to that, that in fact what we were told at the scene a few minutes ago was that in fact 2 different explosive devices were found in addition to the one that went off.
So a total of 3.
A total of 3, and of course
have is that one device was deactivated. Apparently there's another device, and obviously whatever did the damage to the Murrah building was a tremendous, very sophisticated explosive device.
Unfortunately this time, because as we've told you, 2 other explosive devices were found and were not detonated, and they were larger. The first bomb that was in the federal building did go off. It did the damage that you see right there. The second explosive was found and diffused. The third explosive that was found, and they are working on right now as we speak, I understand, both the second and third explosives, if you can imagine this, were larger than the first. And what these later devices are doing to the rescue effort, time is so valuable right now as they try to get to these people who perhaps somehow are still hanging on. But there were more bombs set to go up, according to ATF officials.
Only President Clinton and his associates stood to gain from the April 19th, 1995 bombing. It created a police state. Thank God people like Representative Charles Keyes have been standing up against butchers like Reno.
President Clinton just called Governor Frank Keating, and he says that 3 FBI anti-terrorist teams are en route to Oklahoma City right now.
I've been able to confirm that it was a car explosion. Now, that word coming to us from Mayor Ron Norick earlier, 1,200 pounds of explosives parked out in front of the federal building. And ATF has confirmed that as well.
You just saw a 180-degree change in the newscast. The government line. Here you see a building right across the street, barely even damaged. And then, as you turn towards the Alfred P. Murrah building right across the street, you see absolute devastation. And you can't really see what happened here because they hurriedly destroyed the building, the crime scene, as quickly as possible and kept independent examinators and examiners and experts out. So we'll never really have a true accounting of what happened here. All I'm calling for is a real investigation. And the people of Oklahoma City have been calling for an investigation. So you've got ex-military people, politicians, police chiefs, all across the board smell a huge, gigantic, stinking rat, and it doesn't matter to our government. They're just going to use our children as much as they can in those deaths to get as much gas mileage for big government and police state as they can possibly get. And I'm telling you something, that is flat wrong. Frederick Whitehurst, who was one of the heads of the FBI crime lab, resigning and saying that they were manufacturing evidence in this case and others. Did you ever hear about that?
Yeah, I heard about it. It just, I don't know if one man could have done this, but so far that's the only man we've convicted, so I have to go by the way the courts are.
What do you think about the multiple seismograph evidence from the University of Oklahoma and the U.S. Geological Survey that picked up multiple explosions?
I didn't hear much about that. And I feel sorry for these people. I got people that live here, and they're not too sure what's going on around here, so.
And I've just been asking people that look like they're knowledgeable. Y'all familiar with what happened in 1933 in Germany? The Reichstag? Do y'all remember that? It happened to their parliament building?
Right, that's right. They blew that up. Hitler blew that up to get rid of or to make it look like it was the current government.
Communist, yes.
Or the communists.
Yes,
yeah.
He wanted fear, he wanted some terrorism bills, and he got them. They didn't really get all the stuff they wanted here in America. Are you familiar with what Nero did in Rome?
Yes, he burned it, and that's where we're going right now.
All right, thanks a lot.
All right, someone sent me this article on Terry Yakey. He is the police officer in A Noble Lie. They said they murdered him, tortured him, because he knew too much about the Oklahoma City bombing. So if I'm going to read the article, I'm going to turn on the recorder. We'll get it right into YouTube. I'll put the link in the description bar. The title is The Strange Death of Terry Yakey by Wendy S. Painting. Unanswered questions haunt the family of Oklahoma City bombing first responder by Wendy S. Painting, October the 2nd, 2009. On May the 11th, 1996, the New York Times ran a story with the headline, "A policeman who rescued 4 in bombing kills himself." Sergeant Terrence Yakey, Oklahoma City Police Department, was 30 years old and was about to receive the police department's Medal of Valor for his heroic efforts the day of the Oklahoma City bombing, which occurred on April the 19th, 1995. Yakey was the first to arrive on the scene that terrible day and saved the lives of countless people from the rubble of the building and the horrific effects of the explosion. The article says Yakey committed suicide, claiming that he was living in emotional pain because he could not do more to help the people injured in the bombing, and that he was suffering from intense survivor guilt, which he was unable to manage. But others in Oklahoma City, including the family of Terrence Yakey, claim that his death was not a suicide at all, but a brutal murder, and indicate that local law enforcement were complicit in covering up this murder. On September the 26th, 2009, the Yakey family spoke out for the first time on video for an interview with journalists from Radio Free Oklahoma and an American Studies PhD student from the University of Buffalo, who is writing her dissertation on the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. What the researchers found was that the facts surrounding Yakey's death are quite disturbing, and the treatment of the Yakey family in the aftermath of the death was beyond appalling. Terry Yakey and family, 1995. It is important to note how exactly Yakey is supposed to have killed himself. He was said to have slit his wrist and neck, causing him to nearly bleed to death in his car, and then miraculously climbed over a barbed wire fence. He then was purported to have walked over a mile's distance through a nearby field, eventually shooting himself in the side of the head at an unusual angle. Startlingly, No weapon was found at the scene of the body, no investigation was conducted, no fingerprints taken, and no interviews with family members or friends were had to try and determine why Yakey would have been suicidal, or if he had, in fact, been suicidal at all. Instead, the conclusion that Yakey's death was a suicide was reached immediately, without an autopsy. Yakey had witnessed things during his response to the bombing which did not agree with the official version of events, touted by the national media and law enforcement at the time. Yakey was in the process of collecting evidence which supported and documented the inconsistencies he witnessed the morning of the bombing at the scene itself. Far from being suicidal, Yakey was in the process of achieving some major life goals. He had just been offered a job with the FBI in Dallas and was planning on taking the job and moving there with his sister and brother-in-law. Yakey, a military veteran who had served in Saudi Arabia, was also a 7-year veteran of the Oklahoma Police Department and had just been promoted to sergeant in the OKC PD. Just prior to his death, he had been awarded the key to the Oklahoma City for his heroism during the bombing. Additionally, Yakey had reconciled with his ex-wife. Despite all this, Yakey was living under constant scrutiny for his refusal to go along with the official version of events, and because his refusal to change his story about what he saw the day of the bombing, causing him to suffer great persecution from his brothers in law enforcement. Although he was looking forward to his new job with the FBI, Yakey described by his family as a man who was also living in great fear at this time and who was preoccupied with the harassment he was being subjected to on a daily basis. When Yakey showed up to his oldest sister's home one evening, he was physically ill. When she attempted to take him to the emergency room, Yakey would not allow this because he told her, "They can find me there." Yakey never told her who they were in an attempt to protect her. Yakey left his sister's house that evening and was found dead the next day in a remote field in El Reno, Oklahoma. Immediately after his family was notified of Terrence Yakey's death, they insisted that they did not believe Yakey had killed himself. Their conclusion was based on the manner of death, Yakey's personality, his recent statements about the future, and the lack of investigation and autopsy. At first, they tried to get answers. Why wasn't there a proper investigation? Where was the weapon he shot himself with? Why wasn't an autopsy allowed? As they asked questions in the following days, they would sometimes be approached by others in the police department who told them in no uncertain terms, but off the record, that Yakey had been murdered. As a result of all their inquiries, they were harassed and followed by the Oklahoma City Police and others. Unmarked cars sat in front of their homes for hours, and this stalking was caught on video by the family. Shortly after his death, Yakey's ex-wife had her home broken into and a balloon was left in her house. Written on the balloon in black marker were the words, "We know where you are." This harassment and surveillance had a chilling effect on the surviving Yakey family and on their inquiries into Terrence's death, which were in effect shut down until now, 14 years after the fact. The Yakey family, 2009. Yakey's 92-year-old grandmother, Mary Kukindala, says that it is important that she knows who killed her grandson and implores anyone who can help her. "From my heart, I want something to happen to show he had no right to be killed. His life was taken away for nothing." His oldest sister, Vicky Yakey, speaking out again after all these years, states that she knew as soon as she was told by the Oklahoma Police Department that Yakey had committed suicide, that it was untrue. "I screamed out, 'He didn't take his life, someone murdered him.' Yet detectives told her that she was crazy and that she watched too much television. I had just seen him the night before. He was mentally fine. I wanted answers that night, but she says they rushed her through the paperwork, all the while telling her she was crazy. She asked, who was he running from? Who was he trying to protect? I am doing this interview to reach out to the world, to anyone that can help." Another sister, LaShawn Hargrove, says he was an awesome older brother. He was always all about his work. He was serious about being a cop. When she received news of his death, she says she dropped the phone and began to sob. She felt nauseous. She needed to get to her family. Later, Oklahoma City Police Department would approach her and say, "Sorry for your loss," but soon after, she says, the family was told that they needed to keep our mouths shut and were continuously told that the death was a suicide. She feels that her brother's death deserves answers and an investigation that were never provided. "I want justice for his life. He needs to have his story told. I wish I had him back." When Yakey's mother received a call notifying her of the death, She was told by the Oklahoma City Police Department not to drive anywhere and that a car would come to pick her up. This was around 10 p.m. But by 1 a.m., the promised transportation had not arrived. In fact, they never showed up for Yakee's grieving mother. No one ever came. Yakee's mother says that for the last 14 years, she has been going over and over something that I don't believe to be true. I believe it to be murder. I don't know who did it. That's why we need answers. You need to put your child to rest, and without knowing what happened, I vowed I will never give up. I need answers. If there's anyone who could help, I would appreciate it. The family says that the death of Yakee is a taboo subject in Oklahoma City. There is a saying: if you don't want the Terry Yakee done to you, keep your mouth shut. Yakee is not the only suspicious death which has occurred due to the attempt to find answers about the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, and it is not the only one to be called a suicide. The strange and grisly death of Kenneth Trentadue being another. The suspicious death of Kenneth Trentadue at the Oklahoma City Federal Transfer Center in August 1995 would be ruled a suicide, despite the opinion of the medical examiner. After examining the body of his brother, it became clear to attorney Jesse Trentadue that his brother had been tortured and murdered. Jesse had received chilling information from Timothy McVeigh, convicted and executed for his role in the 1995 bombing, that his brother's murder was related to the bombing and its subsequent misinvestigation. Subsequently, Jesse began a quest to determine why exactly his brother had died, leading him to file many Freedom of Information Act requests about the bombing and related matters. After filing a wrongful death lawsuit, the Trentadue family was rewarded $1.1 million for emotional distress caused by the authorities' mishandling of the death. On September the 28th, 2009, attorney Jesse Trentadue made national news when portions of surveillance tapes of the bombing were begrudgingly released by the FBI under the orders of a federal judge. Like Jesse Trentadue and those who lost family members in the Oklahoma City bombing, the surviving family of Terrence Yakee also seek answers which they feel will help them achieve closure, justice, and peace of mind.
Because here's now what we are starting to learn about the succession, or what someone obviously hoped would be a succession of explosions. The first bomb that was in the federal building did go off. It did the damage that you see right there. The second explosive was found and diffused. The third explosive that was found, and they are working on right now as we speak, I understand, both the second and third explosives, if you can imagine this, were larger than the first. So try to imagine two or threefold happening what we've already seen there. It is just incredible to think that there was that much heavy artillery that was somehow moved into the downtown Oklahoma City Federal Building. Two other explosive devices were found and were not detonated, and they were larger than the first.
I think he said another bomb.
Oh my God, another bomb. We just saw, if you were watching there was a white pickup truck backing a trailer into the scene here. They're trying to move people out of the way so they can get it in. Appears to be the Oklahoma County Bomb Squad. It's their bomb disposal unit, essentially, is what it is, and it is what they would use to, if the report that we gave you just a few moments ago turns out to be correct, that they have found a second explosive device of some kind inside this building. They'll back that trailer down there, and the bomb squad folks will go in, and they will use that trailer. You see the bucket on the back there, this is how they would transport the explosive device away from this populated area to try to do something with it.
The Justice Department is reporting that a second explosive device has been found in the AP Murrah building in downtown Oklahoma City. Mike, you're still with us, aren't you?
Yes, I am, and I might tell you in addition to that, in fact, what we were told at the scene a few minutes ago was that, in fact, two different explosive devices were found in addition to the one that went off.
So a total of three.
A total of three.
Now confirmed through federal authorities that a second bomb has been found inside that federal building in Oklahoma City. It was an explosion at 9 o'clock this morning that did that damage you're looking at right there, blowing off the entire north face of that building. Again, you're looking at the north face there. A second bomb was found on the east side of that building. A bomb squad is on the scene. That second bomb has not exploded. We don't know quite the status yet, if they've managed to defuse it, but it has been confirmed that a second bomb was found on the east side.
The report I have is that one device was deactivated. Apparently there's another device, and obviously whatever did the damage to the Murrah building was a tremendous, very sophisticated explosive device.
So what's your job?
What was that?
What's your job?
I'm a parks clerk.
Oh, you just parking this one, huh?
Yeah, basically.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I was speaking to Holland and Austin, and you're the writer and the editor of A Noble Lie, I believe.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Excellent. So, as I said just before I brought you on the air, I haven't actually seen your film yet, but I am aware of some of the information relating to the Oklahoma City bombing. But before we get into the evidence to suggest, this was an inside job, maybe you can just briefly go over the official narrative of the Oklahoma City bombing, which most people believe, because most people believe what they're told by the government and the mainstream media.
Well, the official story of the Oklahoma City bombing is that on April 19th, 1995, in Oklahoma, a disgruntled U.S. Army veteran named Tim McVeigh drove a Ryder truck full of ammonium nitrate and fuel up in front of the federal building and blew it up, killing 168 people. The official narrative dictates that Tim McVeigh was the only person in that truck, that he was the only person involved, that he had one accomplice, Terry Nichols, who helped him construct the bomb, and that was the extent of the conspiracy. With A Noble Lie, we demonstrate beyond the shadow of a doubt that the official story is false, and we called it A Noble Lie. That's from Plato's Republic. A noble lie is a myth or untruth told by the elite to preserve harmony and the position of that elite, and we believe the official story is false and a cruel myth.
So how long have you guys actually been researching this subject, and what got you first interested in the issue? Well, I believe you're from Oklahoma, so that's obviously why you're interested in it. But maybe you can give us
I think Hall and I both kind of came to this from a different perspective. I came into the project a little bit later, but from the time I got there, I realized there was an unbelievable amount of data that had been collected already, and interviews that had been done with expert witnesses and people that were inside the building. But I would say, really between what the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee did after the bombing, and then, of course, Christopher Emery, who also narrated the film, along with Holland and James Lane, our director, they put together, it must have been 10 years in the making when you put it all together. And so, we could have made a 4 or 5 hour film out of all of the information that we had, but, we had to compress it down into the core essence of the story and try to get something out that people could set through without getting bored of it after 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. So, have you ever believed the official story, or have you always been skeptical about the story that was presented by the media and the government?
Well, I was here at that time during the Oklahoma City bombing. I was a young man, about 18 at the time. And, at that time, the media completely whitewashed over it after about a week. And so, I believed what everyone else believed, really. It wasn't until years later that I started to become aware of false flag terror operations that the government had, conducted in the past, that I tied it in and said, hey, wait a minute, there's something going on here with Oklahoma. There's all these unanswered questions. And, I'll let Holland pick it up from there.
Yes, I was actually in the U.S. Marine Corps at the time of the bombing, and I was kind of half awake to things that were going on. So I was actually at least paying attention to some of the anomalous evidence that was being reported piecemeal out of the Oklahoma City bombing. And I knew something was wrong. So when I eventually moved back to Oklahoma, I started putting out a handwritten handbill based on my own research, and that led to collaboration with the Oklahoma Bombing Investigation Committee led by State Representative Charles Key, which compiled a lot of evidence contrary to the official story, trying to get a congressional investigation, trying to get an independent grand jury to look into it. So we tried to honor their heroic labor in the early days of the bombing, because the bombing happened in the early days of the internet. So the dissemination of this information was not as vast as you see after 9/11 and so forth. But the Oklahoma City bombing is one of the most demonstrable cases of a total lie. There is not even one official story. Every different agency or group in the government has a different story about what happened. And they're basically just cover stories. We interview firsthand eyewitnesses, government employees, Air Force general, cops on the scene, people who were involved, the family members of those who died. And we establish a moral authority, and we interview the firsthand resources to demonstrate that the official story is false.
Yeah, now there's a whole list of interesting people here that you do interview in the film. I believe there's a Brigadier General Benton Partin. Maybe you could talk about his findings, because he did a report into the damage that this truck bomb allegedly did to the front of the building, and I believe he says that that wasn't possible, basically.
Well, the damage to the Murrah building is very problematic for a couple of reasons. One, the crater from the truck bomb, which is much smaller than they put in the FEMA report, which we demonstrate in the movie, is offset from the major damage to the building. Most of the front support columns failed, which led to a collapse on the levels facing the street. But there was a bite where the supporting columns all the way to the back of the building had completely collapsed. And most of the casualties, including the 19 children in the daycare center, died when these floors pancaked upon one another. That bite is majorly offset. It is asymmetric to the crater. It's simply impossible for an exterior truck bomb, for that blast wave to turn a corner and manifest greater energy farther away from the blast point than closer in. There are columns closer to the truck bomb that are totally intact, sheetrock still hanging on them. Columns farther away are totally dissolved. General Benton K. Partin, he was the chief of Air Force weapons development. He spent his career blowing things up and conducting bomb damage analysis. He came to Oklahoma City, looked at the evidence, and he issued his famous Partin report, which demonstrates that, for one, the blast wave from a truck bomb is about 10 times less powerful than what is necessary to destroy that concrete and cut the rebar, and that there must have been at least 4 interior explosives placed inside the building.
And if people don't realize what rebar is, these are giant pieces of steel that are put inside the concrete to reinforce them. And so when you look at the bomb damage analysis and the picture of what happened there, you can see clearly that these metal rods inside this concrete were completely cut off in sharp points, not bent up with hanging pieces of concrete in between them, which is what you would expect from a truck bomb.
So this was a fertilizer bomb, basically, that they said McVeigh had created to do this damage. And this was totally inconsistent with the actual damage to the building.
Well, I mean, some of your listeners may appreciate this. I mean, they say it was an ammonium nitrate fuel oil bomb, which was the first time that was used. It was in 1970 at the University of Wisconsin in the United States. Some radical students blew up the Army math lab. That was a similar-sized truck bomb to what was used in Oklahoma City. Same components, they say. It didn't even leave a crater. It barely damaged the building, and the Army math lab was only closed for one day. At Oklahoma City, you have catastrophic structural collapse. Another signature of an ANFO bomb, which was later used to great extent in Northern Ireland, is that there is a massive ammonium nitrate cloud from an ANFO bomb. That is the signature of the bomb. There are no reports of trouble with respiration, no reports of seared lungs. No one reported any damage from ammonium nitrate gas cloud, which would have been present had it been an ANFO bomb.
Okay. And you mentioned there also the reports of other devices in the building at the time. I think that was actually reported in the sort of local media, but that's since been quickly covered up. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, when you see the movie, which we just want to remind your listeners that you can go to anoblelie.com and watch the trailer there, get a copy of that film. You see in the film, we put together a whole string of these reports from the local media that first day, and they were all confirming that there were multiple devices found inside the building. And whenever you tie this together with the Air Force report that was done at Eglin Air Force Base, even in their own report after they had reconstructed this so-called ANFO bomb that McVeigh had supposedly constructed and tried to recreate the bomb scenario against a much weaker structure, it did hardly any damage, especially when compared to what happened at the Murrah building. And in their own report, they agreed with Benton K. Parton that it would have had to have been locally placed charges on the columns that would have brought those columns down, and that totally ties in with the reports of other bombs being found inside the building, not in other truck bombs outside of the building, but inside.
We actually interview, we actually have on tape taken by the law enforcement there during one of the evacuations when they reported one of these bombs. You see the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms removing blocks of C4 plastic explosive and loading it on a stretcher. We have that tape and we show it in the movie.
Okay, so the actual physical evidence is on film there, the explosives.
You bet.
Oh, wow. And I believe there was one of the first responders, a guy by the name of Terry Yakey. Can you maybe tell us his story? It sounds rather sad, but he's believed to have seen something in the building, and subsequently he was murdered.
Well, it was ruled a suicide, but he was murdered. Officer Terry Yakey was the first police officer to respond to the bombing. He was just a couple blocks away. He was the first one there, and he said a couple things were wrong. One, he heard multiple explosions emanating from the building, and we can confirm this because the 3 seismographs in the state of Oklahoma recorded 2 different explosions up to 10 seconds apart, and we have witnesses on tape talking about the gap between the shaking, the fact that the building was shaking at the 10 seconds. They thought it was an earthquake before the windows came in. This is consistent with the seismograph evidence and the evidence for other bombs inside the building. Terry Yakey also saw people outside the building that shouldn't have been there. Federal agents based in offices miles away. What were they doing standing there? People who were supposed to be inside the building were standing outside watching what was going on. Terry Yakey he reported this in his original report he submitted to the police department. They ordered it cut down. And then when he started protesting that, they subjected him to a campaign of harassment, despite the fact that he was being awarded the Medal of Valor, the highest award, for saving 8 lives in the bombing. He pulled people out until he fell into a hole and injured his back. About a year after the bombing, Terry Yakey places a call to a friend of his, another police officer. He says, "Hey, we're going to meet for dinner. Let me shake these feds who are following me, and we'll meet up." Yakey had been followed before by the FBI. He knew it was them. That's the last contact anyone ever had with him that we know of. His car was found the next day. It was full of blood by a sheriff's deputy. They found his body a mile and a half away. He had a dozen wounds over his body, slashes and cuts, which were packed with mud and grass as if he'd crawled or been dragged. He had ligature marks on his wrists as if he'd been handcuffed, a ligature mark around his neck, and he had a bullet wound to his head that entered the upper portion of his head and exited lower jaw with no powder burns. This was ruled a suicide. But despite the fact that no autopsy was performed and no ballistic tests were performed on the weapon, everyone knew it was a murder, but it was ruled a suicide. And the death of Terry Yakey, we interview his mother in the movie, and she knows, and the family knows he was murdered. The message of that was that it was first of all to silence Terry Yakey, and second of all to silence any other first responders who may think about talking about what they saw.
I think the interesting point to note about this case is the fact that Terry was found on federal land that was connected to a penitentiary, a federal penitentiary here in El Reno. And the significant thing about that is that if it was found on federal land, the local police could not have done their own investigation. The federal authorities would have come in and taken over that. So that's why that was silenced.
Okay. Have there been any other, suspicious deaths relating to the Oklahoma bombing?
Yes, we have an interview with Jesse Trentadue. Jesse Trentadue is an attorney out of Salt Lake City. His brother, weeks after the bombing, was picked up in California on a parole violation for a distant bank robbery conviction he had in the 80s. He was flown to Oklahoma, halfway across the country on Con Air, and for a parole hearing, which didn't make much sense at all. And they talked, and they said, well, we'll get you a lawyer. And they actually didn't expect him to serve any time. It actually wasn't a parole violation. It was a misunderstanding. And it was not a big deal. A couple days later, Kenny Trentadue is dead in federal custody. When they finally get the body back, it's covered in bruises. There are bruises on the soles of the feet. There are fingerprint marks on the biceps. His hands are bruised, bloody, and black and blue as if he'd been fighting.
And we just want to remind people that if they watch this film, we do show graphic pictures of Kenny Trentadue and the state of his body. And so, a lot of people complained about this, but we just wanted to show it because once you see for yourself what the condition of his body was in when he was dead, it wouldn't take a forensic scientist to understand that this man was held and beaten, and they ruled it a suicide. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
And we had permission from the family to publish those pictures. We're very good friends with Jesse Trentadue, and he fully approved of it. Anyways, so Kenny Trentadue's dead. It's obviously a murder. Jesse Trentadue sues the FBI and the Bureau of Prisons. He later wins a wrongful death lawsuit. But he still didn't know why his brother was killed, but he was getting calls and messages from people. And it turns out his brother was killed in a case of mistaken identity. The FBI thought Kenny Trentadue was the fabled John Doe number 2, the accomplice to Tim McVeigh that everyone who saw him there saw him with. As it turns out, it was mistaken identity. He wasn't the man, but the FBI believed it to the extent they were willing to kill him. So Jesse embarked on a Freedom of Information Act crusade against the federal government, trying to find out why his brother died, suing for documents related to the Oklahoma City bombing. He discovered that there were informants, federal law enforcement informants, surrounding McVeigh, watching him in the months and days leading up to the bombing, up to 4 to 6 informants, according to the government's own records.
Okay, very interesting. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about Tim McVeigh. I mean, in the media, he was obviously painted as a sort of a lone wolf connected to white supremacist groups, but I believe this image of him is false, basically.
Well, there are so many different stories about the mysterious Tim McVeigh until you do some really deep research and you start looking at conversations that were had between members of Tim McVeigh's family. These records were obtained from phone taps. And basically, the most important thing to remember is that although Tim McVeigh was officially out of the military, several years before the Oklahoma City bombing, through the Bill Bean video, which we had on our Free Mind Report at freemindreport.com, you can watch that video. He showed Tim McVeigh in military uniform at a military base a couple of years or a year or so after he was supposedly out of the military. And then, his family's saying, no, he wasn't out of the military. He was in special operations. He was recruited to do these covert missions, and they didn't understand how come it was totally being covered up and it was trying to be, put out there into the media that Tim McVeigh wasn't in the military. Even his own death certificate after his execution said that his occupation was the U.S. Army.
Tim McVeigh told his first set of attorneys that he was recruited to infiltrate neo-Nazi activities while he was in the Army, and that he carried out his actions in Oklahoma City under order from the U.S. government. His attorneys believed him, and they backed out, and they told people that you'll never look at the government the same way you will after you had the conversation I just did. So the evidence indicates that he was still working for the U.S. government.
So you think he was totally a patsy, or how do you judge Tim McVeigh in the documentary?
Well, I have talked to myself people who served with McVeigh in the military in the first Persian Gulf War. I have interviewed myself and with my research partner and co-writer, Dr. Winty Painting, who actually tracked down most of these resources and tracked down a lot of these defense archives we used for research. I have interviewed the man who was in the tank with McVeigh in the first Gulf War. He said McVeigh was incapable of independent action, that he would do whatever you told him. In fact, his exact words were, if you told McVeigh to spit shine a cinder block, he would sit there till it was done. But he was incapable of independent action. I believe McVeigh was just following orders. That's what he was good for.
So he was executed in 2001. I mean, did he try and speak out in any capacity about this before his execution?
The whole process is somewhat troubling. I mean, the trial had been moved out of the federal district in which it occurred, which is against the law. When he was executed, he did not leave any last words. I have interviewed family members who were watching the execution on closed circuit TV, and they told me when they wheeled him out of that room after he was supposedly dead that his chest was still moving. So we really don't know. There was no autopsy performed on his body after the execution, which is always done. I mean, then somehow Tim McVeigh managed to have an autopsy not performed on his body. So we really don't know.
So you're suggesting that he could still be alive, or what?
I don't know. I don't want to know if he's still alive, frankly.
Okay. I mean, what was his connection to this white supremacist camp then? You think he was just infiltrating it, or what?
Well, there was this community in eastern Oklahoma called Elohim City, which we go into in the film. We actually interview one of the people that were at that community, and Josiah Stone, and he confirms that McVeigh was around that community. And later on, through the Freedom of Information Act lawsuits that Jesse Trinidad had won, we've come to realize that there were all these government informants all working at Elohim City. And McVeigh just happens to be one of the cast of characters that we've got going on here, including a German national named Andreas Strassmeyer.
Yeah, in fact, Elohim City, the founder and leader of that until he died, Mr. Millar, it turns out he was a federal informant. He was making $400 a month as an informant. So basically, the FBI was running this white supremacist compound in eastern Oklahoma as a honey trap and watching everyone who went through, including Tim McVeigh.
Okay. Now, I believe there's reports of teams of agents being taken off work that day as well. Have you found any new information about that?
Yes. The supposed target of the attack was the office of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. The official story says that Tim McVeigh was angry at the BATF because of their actions at Waco, Texas. Waco had been besieged by the FBI and the ATF, and the church had burned down 2 years to the day before the bombing, killing up to 75 people, including 20 children. Mm-hmm. Supposedly, Tim McVeigh was very enraged about this, and this is why he tried to blow up the Murrah building to get at the ATF. But the ATF, their office was empty that day, 9 o'clock in the morning on a work day. We demonstrate in this movie that 2 ATF agents lied about being inside the building. One ATF agent claimed that he karate chopped through several walls and injured his hand and saved several people, but we have him on tape minutes after the bombing standing outside the building. He is not covered in sheetrock. His hands are both uninjured, yet a day later he's sporting a bandage around his hand and he has this heroic story. Another ATF agent claimed he was in a free-falling elevator. We interviewed the elevator mechanic who responded. He was there before the fire department. They pried open all the elevators. There was no one in any of the elevators, and he testified about that before a grand jury. That agent lied.
Okay. Very interesting. So maybe you can... Yep, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add there was also the witness that he had called the ATF. I believe his wife worked in the administrative offices for the BATF, and asked, about his wife, what had happened to her and all this stuff. And somebody within the ATF office actually told him that they had all been tipped off by their pagers not to come into work that morning.
So the question is, if the ATF received a warning about something going to happen in that building, how come the hundreds of people who are not involved with law enforcement, with the Social Security Office, with the Housing and Urban Development, the children in the daycare center, how come they weren't given the same warning also?
Yeah. So we've gone through a few of the key people that you interview in the film. Is there anybody else you would like to tell us about? Any other of the important interviews in this film?
Well, we demonstrate that the process was corrupted from the beginning. We have an interview with grand juror Hoppy Heidelberg. He was called for and sat on the original grand jury that indicted Tim McVeigh, Terry Nichols, and others unknown for their role in the bombing. Hoppy Heidelberg, using his powers as a grand juror, wanted to view the videotapes that surrounded the Murrah building. And that's the thing about this case, is that they have never released the videotapes that surrounded the Murrah building. To this day, they didn't even produce them in court. Everyone who saw McVeigh the morning of the bombing says he was not alone. How come they will not demonstrate that by releasing the tapes? We actually interviewed the guy who was contracted to copy hundreds of cassettes of security cameras for the FBI. None of these have been released. Hoppy Heidelberg wanted this evidence and other evidence. For this, he was kicked off the jury and threatened at gunpoint by the FBI. So they were manhandling the investigation from the beginning.
Okay. Now, have you been worried about your own safety at any point during the making of this film? Obviously, you guys are, somewhat of a target now by spreading this information.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. After some of these interviews, I went home and had trouble sleeping, and I was kind of snapping awake to any noise outside my house, because we've interviewed people whose loved ones have been murdered by the federal government trying to cover up the truth. Mm-hmm. So, but we enjoy a good support network here in Oklahoma. That the family members support us. And we're sure that whenever we discover a new piece of information, we put it out there immediately. We don't hide. We don't hold on to anything that would give incentive to get rid of us.
And I just want to say to anybody else who may be thinking of doing something like this, do it. Despite the fact that there is the inherent danger there, it's worth it. Because really, ultimately, if good people don't stand up and expose the lies of our government, they'll just keep doing it. In fact, they're still doing it. Eric Holder, right now, who was all involved in this back in Oklahoma in 1995, this guy is now being, brought up for this gun runner operation now, where thousands of Mexicans have died.
Yeah, Eric Holder is now Attorney General of the United States, responsible for executing the laws of the land. Back in the days after the Oklahoma City bombing, he was responsible in the Justice Department for covering up the murder of Kenneth Trentadue. Now it's making headlines in America that Operation Fast and Furious, run by the ATF and supervised by Eric Holder, as demonstrated by the emails that have been leaked, the ATF was running guns into Mexico to supply drug cartels. Those guns have killed 2,000 people and up to 3 United States law enforcement officers. So what are we to doubt that a similar undercover operation 16, 17 years ago perhaps killed 168 Americans in the Murrah building? Because we have demonstrated that there was an undercover law enforcement operation that was watching McVeigh and his cohorts before the bombing. If something went wrong, now they're covering that up.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you actually go to the extent of naming names or anything like that in the film? I mean, who do you think was responsible for this directly?
Well, Terry Nichols, the only convicted accomplice, was interviewed in prison. He gave an affidavit to Jesse Trentadue. Terry Nichols has no reason to lie. He's serving multiple life sentences in the federal and the state system. He'll never get out of jail. Mm-hmm. And he testified that Tim McVeigh told him that he was working undercover for the FBI, that his handler was Deputy Director of the FBI, Larry Potts. Larry Potts had been involved in the Ruby Ridge fiasco in the United States in 1992, which resulted in the deaths of several innocent people. Mm-hmm. He was also involved in Waco. He was also involved in Operation PACCON, Patriot Conspiracy, an undercover covert operation run by the FBI and ATF to infiltrate every dissident group in America that Elohim City was part of. So it's likely that Terry Nichols is telling the truth and Larry Potts is culpable.
I mean, ultimately, the Department of Justice and the White House, are complicit in this cover-up as well. There were many people involved, and something that we've had some friction from some people that says we didn't name enough names and we didn't point the finger enough. But the problem with that is that even people that are working in these organizations, despite the fact that they may have had a part to play in its execution, these operations are highly compartmentalized, and many of these people had no idea what the end result of any of these potential sting operations they were running out of Elohim City. They had no idea that this might happen. And in fact, we've got witnesses that say that a lot of these people that conducted the Oklahoma City bombing were under the impression that the bomb was going to go off in the middle of the night when no one was there. Mm-hmm. And so, it's hard to point the finger at people and say they're responsible. They may have not even had a clue what was going on.
But that demonstrates the methodology of these deep state events. It's not that every street agent, like Austin said, is covering up the fact that a criminal faction in the U.S. government executed the Murrah bombing. What they do, and they always do, is when you look at these events, is they use existing operations to move those assets in place and to facilitate the cover up. It's not that the street agents are covering up that; they're covering up the fact that it was their truck, it was their bomb, it was their informants, and they're covering up what they think is a massive foul up.
Have you been able to trace like the bomb ingredients and things like that, where they came from? Because often you find it's the feds who are providing the actual, bomb ingredients and things like that.
Well, we know it wasn't ANFO in the truck. Whatever was in the truck was very powerful, but it certainly wasn't powerful enough to do that damage to the building. I'm not precisely sure what was in the truck bomb. We interviewed Don Browning. I have talked to him. He talks about how the bomb squads were talking about finding a whole lot of acetylene bottle caps around, as if whatever was in the truck had been accelerated with acetylene bottles, which is not part of the official story. But the fact is, whatever was in the truck is secondary because it was not the cause of destruction to the Murrah building. There were chunks of the Murrah building found, opposite the site of the crater that moved in the opposite direction of the blast wave. There were interior explosions, as demonstrated by the bulk of the evidence.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so why do you think this was carried out then? What was the reason for this bombing?
Well, in the early 90s, we're not sure if a lot of your listeners will know this or not, if they're up on their American history. But the early part of the 90s, the Patriot movement here in the United States was really growing. There were a lot of militias being reformed. If anybody knows anything about the American Constitution, a well-regulated militia is something that's essential to the maintaining of that Constitution. And so this had kind of died off through the early part of the 20th century. And in the early 90s, because of things like Ruby Ridge and Waco, many people were forming and getting together because they felt that the federal government was just overreaching in their power. And so, of course, the federal government's going to have to respond back to this for their own, survival. And so, when you really look at the legislation that was introduced directly after the Murrah bombing in 95, all it was a rehashing of a bill that they had brought before that had died in the Senate. And so they renamed it after the Oklahoma City bombing, and then they got it passed through because, of course, the American public's all worried about domestic terrorists now. And so really, this is just like any other false flag event. They create the event and then blame it on their enemies, whoever that enemy might be, foreign or domestic, and then they're able to pass legislation that restricts our freedoms.
Mm-hmm. I think initially they did try and say it was an Islamic terrorist attack. Is that right?
Yes, there was definitely an Arab connection to this attack. We don't cover it extensively in the movie because my research so far indicates they played a secondary role. They were involved with parking the truck and running a security perimeter outside the building. The interior explosives were placed by the cohorts of Tim McVeigh based out of Elohim City. We have an eyewitness who names one of these people by name. She was shown a lineup by one of the investigators in the Oklahoma City bombing. It's possible that they had two scripts involved, one to blame it on the Muslims or to blame it on domestic terrorists. And I personally think that the political climate at the time benefited more greatly from blaming it on a right-wing terrorist extremist rather than an Islamic radical. So that's what they went with.
Okay. And it's obviously difficult not to draw parallels between this case and 9/11. What do you think are the main parallels between the two cases?
Well, you see the same methodology. You see the fact that there's supplemental explosives added to maximize damage. You see concurrent military and intelligence operations going on. You see evidence of prior knowledge. You see certain people being spared and warned about the attack. You see the same method of cover-up. There's the manhandling of the media, and the manhandling of the media was perfected in the Oklahoma City bombing because in the early days here in Oklahoma City, there was one local TV station who was reporting on this evidence. They were interviewing John Doe number 2 witnesses. They were talking about the ATF being absent from the building. About a year after the bombing, KFOR-TV was purchased by the New York Times Broadcasting Company, and the programming director was fired. The lead reporter on the Oklahoma City case was let go, and all reporting contrary to the official story vanished. So they perfected that methodology in Oklahoma City, and they applied it on a grander scale in 9/11.
I mean, you see the legislation that's passed as well. I mean, right after Oklahoma City, you had the omnibus terrorism bill that was passed finally. And then, of course, right after 9/11, you had the Patriot Act. And, these things are always designed to limit our freedoms, to allow federal government to encroach in on our privacy just a little bit more.
And another thing on that, there's actually concrete connections. It appears that whatever Arabic cell cooperated with Oklahoma City may have also played a role in 9/11. Several of the 9/11 hijackers trained at flight schools in Oklahoma. Osama bin Laden's personal pilot trained in Oklahoma. Hijackers were getting speeding tickets in Oklahoma. They were meeting in hotels in Oklahoma City. So whatever support cell was activated to assist in Oklahoma City was also activated to assist in 9/11.
Okay. Well, just to wrap up, guys, I mean, where do you hope things are going to go next, basically, in the search for truth and justice relating to the Oklahoma City bombing?
Well, I mean, ideally, I'd like to see a lot of politicians in cuffs and answering very hard questions in front of a tribunal or a court. But I know that's not going to happen. So what we wanted to accomplish with this movie was, one, to wake people up to the truth of what happened in Oklahoma City and to the fact that governments are capable of these actions. They've done it before and they'll do it again. And two, to reclaim the history of the bombing, because they continue to wave the bloody shirt of Oklahoma to demonize dissent in this country, but that's based on a lie. And also to vindicate the victims who know they've been lied to tell the real history of the bombing. And you can see the trailer once again at anoblelie.com, purchase the movie there, and I guarantee we've had rave reviews from everyone who's watched it. We didn't have room for speculation. All we did was present the facts.
Excellent stuff. Well, I'll definitely check it out myself. So that's anoblelie.com.
That's correct.
Excellent, guys. Thanks a lot for joining me tonight. It's been a great interview, and good luck with your research and quest for truth and justice.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you very much for having us on.
Cheers. Bye.
Can't believe it, Oklahoma, all this hatred fell on you. In the quiet hush of morning rush, evil blasted through. Jesus, comfort her. I saw her cry. She was running through the streets, searching for her child. All the lives hurt, all the children, all swept up by design. Sleeping angels in the clouds this night, cradled in his arms. Oh, I saw that child lying limp in his arms, and I saw that man's heart winding down. Now we look for reasons why our hearts will ask, we cannot reply. We have seen this evil now with the will to kill and eyes that prowl. You think it's quiet for the heartland now? The storm has just begun. In the ruins lies the tears it holds, touched by hands that worked all night. As I watch my heart is torn apart, I see Oklahoma, hold on tight. Oh, I saw that child trembling in fear. She was bloody, burnt and white, holding on to anyone, holding on to love is best, helping those who are all lost. For we are living this evil still, with broken hearts and challenged wills. Justice, stop this hatred, Waco instilled. the beast, he will not win. In the minutes and the days to come, and the years they will hurt still, I swear I won't forget the suffering here. I know they never will. Jesus, comfort me. I saw Oklahoma cry. She was searching through the ruins still for more lives. Jesus, comfort her. I saw her cry. She was running through the streets, searching for a child.